Eric DeCosta sat down with Todd McShay, and during some of his answers about how he and the Ravens operate, he could have revealed some hints on how this Ravens offseason could go. We talk about that, some shocking insights from DeCosta as well, and so much more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and it's an audio form where you can follow along and subscribe. We are a 5-day-a-week daily Ravens podcast, plus more, bringing the Ravens news, analysis, updates, so much more in season, off season. It is always 5 days a week, always daily here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Super Bowl just a couple days away. Unfortunately, the Ravens not playing in that game, but that does not mean the headlines have not been coming in fast and furious. I know a lot of people think, oh, well, team gets eliminated, your team gets eliminated, and all of a sudden the headlines will just go and die down as the Super Bowl's over. Well, that has not been the case with this Ravens team. Headlines coming in fast and furious. We've covered it all over here on Locked On Ravens, and Eric DeCosta sat down with Todd McShay. It was an awesome interview, and there were a lot of insights that DeCosta dropped, I think some of which could hint at what the Ravens might do this offseason, others which go back to some former Ravens teams and some of the decisions that were made there. So we're going to talk about how some of these Ravens plans this offseason, maybe DeCosta did share a little insight on what could happen, as well as some of those other things that he mentioned too. So we'll talk about that in the first couple of segments here, because there was a lot of amazing tidbits dropped. And then finally, if you didn't know, the MVP officially gets settled tonight. And we'll kind of revisit that conversation and look back on the season, look back on some takes. And obviously, if you've been listening to the show, I've been a very big supporter of Lamar winning the award. And we'll kind of look at what it could mean for Lamar's legacy if he does. So let's dive into the Eric DeCosta, Todd McShay sit down. Again, a really, really good interview all the way around. It was for the Ringers, the McShay Show. And again, we heard some of the plans from Eric DeCosta during the end of the season press conference, but this was more of an informal sit down between DeCosta and McShay, which I think shed some really interesting insight on everything. Now, in terms of building a team around Lamar Jackson, obviously that's Eric DeCosta's job. He pointed to some of the moves that they already made. So, of course, he said that you try to figure out what he does best and what kinds of players he likes to throw the ball to. And so talked about Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews, Orlando Brown on the offensive line, building up that offensive line. He said, we built an offensive line around him that suited what we do, which is run the football. We believe in having good backs, so we added backs. And we always try to add speed to the field. We feel like Lamar, being the type of player he is, he presents so many challenges for linebackers in the front, getting guys outside. We drafted Hollywood, we drafted Zay, we drafted Bate. We've allocated a lot of resources. We don't have that. The one piece we probably missed on is that big X presence. We've never really had that. We've tried to find that guy. That guy doesn't always grow on trees. Hard to find those guys. That's probably the one thing. But for us, it's always been, okay, offensive line first and foremost, keep it strong, running backs, tight ends, and receivers. So that's the offensive portion of the answer. I just want to cut it off there real quick, bring it back, and I want to talk about that. First of all, I think the fact that DeCosta has singled out the big X presence is something that I've been talking about here for years on Locked On Ravens. Obviously, it has been a need for them, and they have tried. It hasn't worked for them. They really haven't found that consistent option, but it makes sense. All of this adds up to me, and I'm going to name one player here, and I think this kind of encapsulates it all, and that is Miles Boykin. Boykin was the Ravens' third-round pick when they brought in Marquise Brown. It was Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin in 2019. Speed. That was the name of the game for the Ravens. DeCosta has admitted, not only in this interview, but in other interviews, they want to build a track team. And so instead of an A.J. Brown or a DK Metcalf, they picked Marquise Brown in 2019 in that first round. Marquise was the first receiver off the board. I thought A.J. Brown was a better fit. I thought DK Metcalf was a better fit based off what they needed, but they chose the speed option in Marquise Brown. And then they pick a guy in Miles Boykin who is that big body receiver, but it's more of a speed element to his game as well, where he kind of was the best of both worlds, that high risk, high reward. And obviously the risk didn't pay off for the reward. So this offseason, I might expect the Ravens to go and try to really find that big X body. Now, is that the draft? Is that free agency? I don't know. I know a lot of people point to the speed option of Tez Walker. Obviously, Zay has that shiftiness. Rashod Bateman, underrated in some aspects as well. But in terms of like that hulking presence, that's kind of like, if you want to talk about like the final infinity stone, that is something that I think Eric DeCosta, this Ravens team, should really be looking at this offseason, because you have an opportunity. There is a need in that wide receiver room, and it is no secret that the Ravens have struggled to find that big-bodied receiver, that X presence that could have a massive impact, that go-getter. And people say, well, you have Mark Andrews, you have Isaiah Likely. Sure, absolutely they do. But we're not talking tight ends here. It's great to have those guys as go-getters, but as a wide receiver, it's just different, Not that Mark and Isaiah aren't talented pass catchers. They absolutely are. But to have a wide receiver like that, I think Eric DeCosta might try to go and hit that hard, because you have room on that group where it is only Zay, Rashod, and Tez right now in that room. Deontay Johnson obviously is not going to come back. Tyler Wallace, Nelson Aguilar, those guys are free agents. You have an opportunity to not reset that room, obviously, because you have your top options, but kind of round out the depth. And the big X presence doesn't have to be your top guy. I know that a lot of people give Zay a little bit of flack for not being the prototypical number one receiver like an A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, those types of that type of build. I still think Zay is a heck of a player, and I don't necessarily discount Zay because of his size. He's still super, super effective. But I think a lot of people look at wide receiver one. Oh, it is that big guy. It is that big physical X presence. It doesn't always work out that way. And I think for Zay and Rashod Bateman, they've established themselves. But it's about finding the complements, and I think a big-bodied receiver could definitely be that. DeCosta, as we mentioned, also talked about the offensive line, and he talked about that during his end-of-season press conference. The Ravens, we knew this. They were going to go through a multi-year offensive line rebuild, right? Multi-year offensive line rebuild. And when he talks about, all right, the offensive line, first and foremost, keep it strong. It's always been offensive line first and foremost. That's been big for the Ravens. We know that. Every team needs offensive linemen. The Ravens, they have a specific thing that they like. Obviously, there's been a lot made about, it's not the be-all, end-all, but teams look at arm length, teams look at mobility, teams look at athleticism, teams look at run blocking versus pass blocking. The Ravens have their preferences within that. But you are set right now, if you're the Ravens, at 1.5 positions. And I say 1.5 because you have two players in Linderbaum and Rosengarten that you feel really good about. And I say 1.5 because we don't know if Rosengarten is going to be on the left side or the right side come next season. So you have two players you feel good about, 1.5 positions depending on where Rosengarten plays. So if Friday Stanley comes back, McCary, does Daniel Falele stick? I think that, the emphasis that DeCosta has placed both in the end of season press conference and, talking about it here with Todd McShay, they're probably going to look at options. Now, the difference with offensive linemen versus other positions is that offensive line market is absolutely crazy. And so the Ravens can't just go and sign two veteran offensive linemen that are going to be super, super effective and, some of the top guys on the market, because there are going to be teams with $100 million in cap space that are going to throw $100 million contracts at those guys. So that's where the Ravens have to get creative. And maybe if they want Stanley back, hope that the connection brings him there, maybe on a discount. He's projected right now to make over $20 million a year, or it's the draft. And you find guys that way, players on rookie contracts. So I think that could be another way the Ravens go and approach this offseason. And the thing that I think was really awesome in DeCosta's answer and how the offense grew and how they can build upon that moving forward this offseason into next year was the fact that he said, quote, "We've morphed under Todd Monken and all the different things that we do offensively. Lamar has improved every year as a passer. And we went from being a very run-centric offense to being a very balanced team this year that can score in many different ways." It was never that the Ravens couldn't come from behind, right? That was never the thing. They could do it. But we saw over and over and over again this season, the Ravens do that sort of thing. And I think that, we saw those comebacks like against the Colts a couple of years ago. And obviously they've had other games like that too. But there was a much more, I don't know, I honestly felt calm for the most part when Baltimore got down. I think the one that kind of shook me a little bit was that Buffalo game. But even then, they were down big in the divisional round. They came back. They almost won that game. So moving forward, you can trust yourself as being that more balanced offense, whereas under Greg Roman, like Eric DeCosta said, it wasn't as balanced. But here with Todd Monken, we have certainly seen that evolution, and I think it is really, really cool that the Ravens have evolved, because that's what we all wanted to see. We all wanted to see kind of the wings be put on Lamar Jackson and him go and fly and have this awesome season. In the past 2 years under Todd Monken, we have certainly seen that. So I think Baltimore's offseason will reflect as such. And things that Eric DeCosta said in his interview with Todd McShay, I think definitely reflects that, because, DeCosta said that they're a ball control team. He said, quote, "We like to control the ball for a 6 minute, whatever it is. We want to make sure if we get into the fourth quarter of a game and we have the lead, we're tough to play against. We want to choke the other team out," basically is what he said. So that was like to the max with Greg Roman. They would have 12-minute drives, 10-minute drives, 8-minute drives, whatever, 11-minute drives. But I just think it's more efficient with Todd Monken, and they can switch it up more. So you get that X presence, you get some more guys on the offensive line, especially longer-term pieces. Plus you maybe, depending on what happens with Mark Andrews, if you do move on from him, probably draft another tight end in that case. There are going to be some tough decisions coming up, but right now, I think Baltimore is in a good spot to build on that instead of what I've said throughout the entire offseason so far, a very short offseason so far. Instead of really having to go and replace guys that you're losing, there isn't that long of a list of free agents this year for the Ravens. Coming up, though, in the second part of the show, continue talking about Eric DeCosta's sit-down with Todd McShay. DeCosta revealing some things about how the Ravens offseason could play out based off his answers, and diving into some things that have happened in the past for this Ravens team and giving Ravens fans some answers on some decisions this Ravens team has made in the past. So be sure to stay tuned. Lots to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday edition of the show. Appreciate everybody being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day as well. Talking about Eric DeCosta's sit-down interview with Todd McShay. Again, just awesome insight all the way around. Some of his answers maybe hinted at what the Ravens could do this offseason, and definitely line up with what he said during his end-of-season press conference. And I thought that it's really interesting to kind of get a little behind-the-scenes look of how the Ravens operate and how they could operate in the future. We talked about that a little bit in the first part of the show as well. But DeCosta also had a couple of really interesting stories that I definitely want to talk about. The first of which, let's go back in time to when the Ravens won the Super Bowl, 2012-2013 season. Obviously, that team was great. It was Ray Lewis's last ride. They got the job done. But then in the offseason that year, for those that remember, they lost a lot of that team. Guys were traded away, guys were cut, guys signed elsewhere. And one of the most controversial decisions, maybe in Ravens history in terms of a personnel move, was trading away Anquan Boldin, who was one of the heart and souls of that team and just embodied what it was like to be a Raven. And Eric DeCosta kind of talked about him and the tough lessons that he's learned from Ozzie Newsome, obviously growing through the organization. DeCosta's a lifer with the Ravens. He makes that known everywhere he goes. He's very proud of that, and I don't blame him. It's an incredible accomplishment. And one of the things that he did talk about was after the team won the Super Bowl, they had to make tough decisions, especially on the Anquan Boldin situation. He said we were in a bad cap situation and we had to trade him and we didn't get much for him. It was a horrible football decision, but we had to do it. He said that maybe they could have moved some money around and kind of finagled it in a certain way, but that would have put him in a tough decision otherwise. And so the Ravens traded him to San Francisco. They got back barely anything for him, for a player that, again, was one of the key catalysts of that Super Bowl run. And to me, when you talk about like every team has a worst trade in franchise history, to me, that is it. There are some others that you could talk about, most definitely. But that Anquan Boldin trade, it just, one of the heart and souls just gone like that for nothing. It wasn't like they got a ton of draft compensation for him. It was not a lot of return. And I don't necessarily disagree with Eric DeCosta's sentiment here, where it's like, it's the big, you can't keep everybody, going to have to make sacrifices. Those are tough decisions. And there always are going to be tough decisions, most definitely. But I think for a lot of Ravens fans, at least at that time, it left a sour taste in people's mouths because it's like, okay, now it's just all this cost cutting stuff. And, they got a championship out of it. It's different where if they didn't get a championship and then all these guys are leaving, all these guys are getting traded, it's different. But he had mentioned how it was tough to make those decisions. Obviously, DeCosta wasn't the general manager at the time here. It was still Ozzie Newsome. But then he said, and went into another story. He said his first year as general manager in 2019, I had just taken over. January 19, I took over, got to the first day of the new league year. We lost to Darius Smith, Terrell Suggs, Eric Weddle, CJ Mosley, 4 legit Pro Bowl players. We couldn't sign him back. I tried to sign CJ, couldn't. So Darius Smith won as a free agent, had to cut Eric Weddle. Terrell Suggs signed with Arizona. And DeCosta said, could have finagled a way to keep those guys and could have overpaid CJ, could have kept Weddle for another year, who he admitted he was very close with, said he could have overpaid Suggs, but it wasn't the right thing to do at that moment for the club. And so he said, I just had to eat it. I had to do it because it was the right thing to do. It was very hard, and I learned that from Ozzie. There are always times where teams get caught up in that. Teams get caught up in this guy's been with the organization, and we need to at all costs. If a team comes in, swoops in with a huge offer, some teams get caught up and we're going to top it. We're going to overpay. The Ravens don't operate that way, where it doesn't make it any less of a tough decision. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't work. And we've seen that. We've seen it play out both ways. But with this Ravens team, they don't like to get, okay, we're going to pay a guy $100 million just because some other team's going to offer him 90. Right? It doesn't work that way for them. They trust their draft process. They trust the formulas and the way that they scout. And Eric DeCosta went into detail on a lot of that. And I think this might be what broke the internet. Look, Eric DeCosta said this, and when he said it, I'm like, wait, is this true? So I'll read it out. We can discuss after I read it. But essentially, DeCosta said that the Ravens use Madden ratings. And for those that don't know, there was a whole big controversy with the Jets a couple of months ago when their whole process of how they evaluate people comes out. But DeCosta said there's a lot of other stuff that they use. Mentioned actually he gets a lot of his stuff from the Orioles because they have a whole formula and thing that they use. And Ravens and Orioles, they do have a relationship. So I thought it was interesting that he said that. But he also said Madden ratings. Who would ever think that an NFL team would use Madden ratings in one of their models? Well, we do. And again, talked about the Madden stuff and, said they have different ways to evaluate both pro modeling, college scouting modeling that assigns grades to every player. Went into some detail. It starts with the scout. So they have a thing called football GPA and football grade. You combine those two things, and that's how they rank players. I'm not so sure how true the whole Madden rating thing is, if we're being honest. Eric DeCosta is known to mess around during interviews. So, look, maybe it is, and maybe that's just part of their formula. But my thing is, I just imagine Eric DeCosta, if this was one of his pranks during an interview, he sits there, watches the clip go viral, because I put it out. I mean, I just said, hey, this is what Eric DeCosta said. I think a lot of people agreed with me that it's just like, okay, he's definitely joking. He doesn't mean this. But I just imagine DeCosta sitting in his office and just rubbing his hands together. Like, we're going to get a team, and a team's going to start using Madden ratings, and DeCosta's sitting there like, we got him. Like, we got him. And maybe that's a competitive advantage, because I think that Eric DeCosta has an uncanny ability to use interviews to his advantage. Sometimes he just likes to joke around. Like, obviously, if you remember on the lounge when the Ravens drafted Tavius Robinson, there was this whole story Eric DeCosta made up. And at the end, he said, "Oh, gotcha. He didn't say the whole gotcha thing in this one. But I think it's interesting that every team has models. And again, whether the Madden rating thing is true or not, or some of the other stuff, the Ravens have a very unique way of evaluating their prospects. And I think it's one of the reasons why they're one of the best drafting teams in the league, and they have been consistently. Because as we know, the Ravens are a team that, look, personnel changes over, staff changes over, but a lot of their philosophies remain the same. Not that doesn't mean that guys don't come in and do their own thing and make their own rules along the way. Certainly that happens, but that's why we see the Ravens hire internally a lot of the time for positions like this. And Eric DeCosta got an opportunity here with the Ravens. So I thought that whole thing was interesting for sure. He also talked a little bit about the way that they got Lamar Jackson to Baltimore. He wanted to keep that very on the down low. Nobody knew about it. And he ended up evaluating the quarterback class and said, okay, Lamar's probably going to be there in the 20s, maybe even the 30s. Didn't want him connected. And here's a line that this is going to stick with me because it's something I've been saying for a little bit. He said, if you see us connected to a player, that means we're probably not connected to that player. I don't ever want to be connected to anybody. The secrecy that this Ravens team likes, they want to operate in the shadows. They don't want to have that leak about them because teams could use that to their advantage. They could trade up, and they know that, okay, if we want to get this guy, we have to move ahead of the Ravens to do it. And so Lamar spent like a day and a half in Baltimore, and DeCosta kept it on the down low. Apparently, a media member caught wind of it, called up the Ravens and said, hey, I heard Lamar was there. And DeCosta's like, no, can you prove it? And DeCosta said, apparently you told the guy you can report it, but you might be wrong. And we never knew. Again, we didn't know the Ravens were interested in Lamar at all. It worked. I mean, another example of that, when the Ravens traded Marquise Brown, nobody knew about that. Absolutely nobody knew about that. And essentially, if the deal was leaked, it would have been off, is what the rumblings were at that time. So crazy to think how secrecy can help so much. And we saw that even in the NBA this weekend with Luka Doncic trade. No one knew about that, because influence can happen both at a league level and even on a fan level in some aspects as well. Although for the Ravens, they're going to do what they want to do. You know, outside perception, they don't care about it. And that's how they have established a successful culture over the course of their franchise history. Coming up, though, in the final part of the show, we'll wrap up the DeCosta talk and get into the MVP talk, because, again, the MVP, the awards ceremony, is tonight. So be sure to stay tuned. Lots to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is sponsored by Betterhelp. What do you want your 2025 story to be? Every January brings a new chapter, 365 blank pages waiting for you to fill. If there's a part of your life you want to rewrite or a plot twist you've been craving, why wait? Life isn't about fleeting resolutions. This is about taking control and becoming the author of your own story. Think of therapy as a personal editor, helping you craft the life you deserve. It's not just for crisis situations. Therapy can help you develop healthier coping strategies, improve your relationships, and empower you to become the best version of yourself. Whether you're facing a challenge or just looking for personal growth, therapy is a powerful tool to help guide your journey. Whether it's learning how to set boundaries or tackling stress in new ways, therapy can help you develop skills for a better tomorrow. Even if you've never tried therapy, the benefits are clear. Finding someone to talk to and gaining fresh perspectives can make all the difference in how you navigate life's ups and downs. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Thursday edition of the show. NFL honors, NFL awards night tonight, which will be exciting. If you're listening to this after the fact, you know if Lamar Jackson won the MVP or not. Going to be a super close race, in my opinion. You know, we'll get to that in a couple of minutes and kind of revisiting that whole MVP conversation, because, man, did we spend a lot of time talking about it this season, and definitely rightfully so. But we'll wrap up the Eric DeCosta conversation. Again, sat down with Todd McShay in an amazing sit-down interview. Talked about a couple of other things. Obviously, one of them being Deontay Johnson. And he was asked, all right, well, you know, Deontay Johnson claiming him, what went into that process. And he said, quote, people were like, what the hell are the Ravens doing? They cut the guy. He goes to Houston and gets cut. The Ravens claim him. He can't play for anybody now. Well, we did that because there's a small chance he signs a contract for more than $2.5 million. And if he does that, he qualifies for a comp pick. So there are things that really motivate me. So those are the things that really motivate me. How do we gain a small advantage? How do we gain a big advantage? You can go get Derrick Henry, you get a huge advantage. For me, part of the excitement is how do we just keep getting all these small advantages that roll into something big? And it is so crazy because, look, the possibility Deontay does sign that deal for $2.5 million, I don't think it's a very big chance. But Eric DeCosta is swinging on that chance. Deontay's not stepping in that Ravens locker room again. He made it very clear, and obviously, like, the situation itself is clear, right? But Deontay's not coming back to the Ravens. But if he does qualify for a comp pick, the Ravens aren't in line. The Ravens are getting 4 comp picks this year. It's not even a question because they lost so many guys last year. It might be a little different depending on how the Ravens approach this offseason, which we did talk about in the first part of the show of, well, if they do get an next wide receiver, and if they do sign an offensive lineman or two, and they don't lose as many guys as they lost, they might not get a ton of comp picks. But we know how much the Ravens like their comp picks. And if Deontay can even qualify for a 7th, that is something the Ravens can use to their advantage. They have had success finding guys in the mid rounds. And I think it's such a testament to what the Ravens organization is and how they have been successful because they don't let anything slip through the cracks, right? Any advantage they can get, they're going to take it. And every team should operate with that. A lot of teams don't. A lot of teams just kind of let things go and say, not a big deal. It's almost like, you see a quarter on the ground and you pick it up and you put it in a jar. And then you see a dime on the ground, you pick it up, put it in a jar. See a dollar bill, you put that in the jar. And then over time, you accumulate that. And while it's not going to add up to $1 million, you might still have, at the end of however many years, a decent chunk of money that you can use to get something you couldn't have gotten if you didn't put in that work. So that to me is kind of how the Ravens operate. It's like getting all these small wins, saving them up, putting them in a jar, and then that equates to an advantage that helps your team. Is it a massive one? Probably not. I think that the fact that the Ravens team operates like that is one of the reasons why they do have 2 Super Bowls in such a short amount of time since coming into the NFL back in '96, and why they are so competitive each and every regular season. Now, I think for Baltimore, the big thing and one of the interesting conversations that is had is every team misses on draft picks. And Eric DeCosta, he was asked about it by Todd McShay and on the sit down, and he ended up saying, we make mistakes. I can give you 5 guys who made mistakes on bad mistakes. Like I literally would have said to you, this guy's a stone cold assassin. He's one of the greatest picks we've ever had. And then 6 months later, I'm going, oh my God, this guy's absolutely terrible. Why did I pick this guy? And it happens every year. We want to be right about 75% of the time. If we can be right about 75% of the time, we're going to be better than most of the other teams. And look, some years the Ravens aren't right 75% of the time. That 2019 draft class for Eric DeCosta was pretty bad when you look back on it. And, I'm sure coming out of that class, I felt confident. Eric DeCosta felt confident. It just doesn't go that way. You're never going to hit on 100% of your draft picks. You're never going to do anything 100% right over the course of a long period of time. There are going to be mistakes, and that's okay. But generally, compared to other teams, Baltimore's done a really good job of just being able to weather the mistakes because they've had so many other things that go their way, and they take advantage of the small advantages that they are handed over the course of a year, 5 years, whatever that may be. Now, let's get to the MVP conversation a little bit here. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, most definitely are going to be the 2 finalists here. Obviously, Saquon Barkley has a case, but I think this is a quarterback award, whether that's the right thing or not. Personally, I don't really think it is, but that's just the conversation. Lamar and Josh both had incredible seasons. Both are incredible players. The Bills had 1 more win than the Ravens. The Bills had the higher seed. Bills 2, Ravens 3. This is a regular season award. Does not matter that the Bills beat the Ravens in the playoffs. That doesn't factor in the conversation whatsoever. I've been on the Lamar MVP train because of the fact that Lamar's statistical advantages were a lot better than Josh's in most categories this season. The efficiency was there. And to me, 1 seed higher and 1 win more does not take away from the statistical advantages Lamar had. I weigh the stats this season over what I weigh the win and the seed. That's just what it is for me. I think that this is going to be super close. It's not going to be a unanimous runaway MVP award for Lamar. If Josh wins it, then, he certainly had a season to win it. I just think that since Lamar had the season he had, it's kind of like Mahomes, right? With Allen, Lamar, Burrow. It's like, okay, well, if Mahomes wasn't in the AFC, Lamar, Joe, and Josh might have a Super Bowl each right now. Maybe that's the case, but Mahomes is there. And to me, the MVP race is like, well, Josh had a great year, but Lamar is there, and he had that year. I think Josh is a future MVP. I just don't think this is his year. And if we are basing the criteria off of, well, Josh doesn't have one and Lamar has two, that kind of just ruins the integrity of the award for me. You give the award to the player that deserves it, and Josh certainly is deserving, but I think Lamar Jackson is the one that deserves the award. So we'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll see. I mean, again, at this point, I don't know who wins. So if you're listening to this after the fact, you can say, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong. Look, Josh won it. Whatever it may be. Two very talented quarterbacks, and we'll see how that all unfolds. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked on Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have more Ravens content for you to round out the week. So be sure to hit that like and subscribe button in video form on the way out and follow along in audio form. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked on Ravens.